By the River's Edge, a true story of identity and serial murder by Gregg Olsen. In 1990, 3 women were found shot and dumped along the banks of the Spokane River. Yolanda Sapp, Nikki Lowe, and Kathy Brisbois, all sex workers, all killed within 4 months of each other. The case went cold almost immediately, folded into the file of a different killer and largely forgotten. The detectives that refused to let it go kept pulling at the thread for over 2 decades. In 2012, a DNA hit finally broke it open. What they found was unlike anything they expected. The man responsible had, in the year 2000, undergone gender-affirming surgery in Thailand and was now living as a woman named Donna Perry. At the trial, the defense argued that it was Douglas who committed the murders, not Donna. That Donna was, in a sense, a different person entirely. Gregg Olsen covers the victims, the investigators, and that legal and moral question, all of it. To understand this book, you need to understand what Spokane looked like in 1990. The East Sprague Avenue corridor, a stretch of motels, bars, and Spokane lots of East downtown, was the city's open-air sex trade. Women working that strip were isolated, transient, and largely invisible to law enforcement. When they disappeared, the investigation was often minimal. This wasn't unique to Spokane. Across the country, sex workers were treated as low-priority victims, a reality that serial killers understood and exploited. Spokane sat inside one of the most disturbing true crime landscapes in American history. Washington State has produced an almost inexplicable concentration of serial killers. Ted Bundy grew up in Tacoma. Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, operated just south of Seattle for nearly 2 decades, killing at least 49 women before he was caught, making him one of the most deadly in U.S. history. Robert E. Lates was working the same Spokane corridors as the murders in this book at the same time. Kenneth Bianchi, one of the Hillside Stranglers, moved to Bellingham, Washington after the Los Angeles murders and killed 2 more women there before police caught him. Israel Keyes, the subject of the book American Predator, grew up in rural eastern Washington. Even Charles Manson has ties to Washington State. Why Washington? Researchers point to several factors that compound each other. The geography first. The Cascades, river systems, and millions of acres of remote forest gave killer easy places to hide and disappear bodies. The I-5 corridor running from Seattle through Tacoma attracted a transient population. Runaways, hitchhikers, people with no local roots and no one watching out for them. Rapid population growth from Boeing and later the tech industry created cities where neighbors didn't really know each other. And some researchers will point to what they call the Pacific Northwest nice. It's a cultural tendency towards conflict avoidance so strong that people hesitate to report something that feels wrong. Whatever the combination, the pattern stretches across decades, and Spokane, Washington sits right in the middle of it. In 1990, the tools that we take for granted didn't exist. The National DNA Database, CODIS, wouldn't go live until 1998. So police departments in different counties didn't really share case files. There was no system connecting a murder in Spokane to a similar case 50 miles away. And for victims on the margins, the institutional will to keep pushing wasn't always there. So cases like this one didn't go cold because detectives were incompetent. They went cold because the system was built in a way that made it easier for certain killers to disappear into the noise. That's the backdrop for this book, By the River's Edge. If the name sounds familiar, Gregg Olsen has written a lot of books. I think he's written tons of fiction and nonfiction, probably most famously for the book If You Tell, which covers another crazy story in Washington State, a different part of Washington, but Shelley Knotek, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. So if you've read If You Tell, that's Gregg Olsen, which is primarily why I decided to read this book, was because I really liked that book. I've read another one of his books called Out of the Woods, but unfortunately none of them compare to If You Tell, and kind of the same story with this book. So a little bit more in this book, what it's covering is these 3 women get killed, as I mentioned earlier, and the case goes cold, but the DNA hit comes up and it shows that this woman who underwent a sex change, who used to be named Douglas, now named Donna, that's the DNA that was found. And the book then dives into who this person is. Who is Douglas/Donna Perry? And the backdrop really is that it's a case unlike any other. I think that's probably one of the main themes of this book, is how strange and complicated the case was because of the fact that she went through this sex change. For me, I guess I just didn't find it to be that, and again, just on my personal, I don't think that's that complicated of a thing. Although it was a big theme of this book, is like, is he the same person still? And to me, that's crazy, right? Like, regardless of, you can do whatever you want. You can go through your sex change, you can be a man, you can be a woman. You still committed the crimes. And that was kind of the theme of that kept spilling over in this book, and included from Douglas / Donna herself. She would basically allude to the idea that, hey, now that I'm Donna, I don't know Doug. I don't know what Douglas did in the past. I had to kill Douglas in order to put away all those violent tendencies that I once had. So I can't remember what Douglas did. And that's kind of occurring throughout the whole book, which is certainly strange. The judge even comments at one point that I think he talks about how it's the strangest story that he's ever, or courtroom that he's ever been a part of. You know, and it goes through in detail, like what was Douglas's life? How did it all play out? And like many of these serial killers, I'm a fan of true crime books, so I've read a lot of them. Most of them have extremely broken homes, come from really poor backgrounds. Obviously doesn't excuse their killing, but I don't know, when you read the story of Douglas as an example, who was consistently beaten, they talk about how he was born, I can't remember the term, it's not a hermaphrodite, but an aphrodite, I believe is what it was, where he had essentially both genitalia, male and female. And his parents, or I think his dad specifically, hated him for that, so he would beat him. They talk about how his brother and his dad used to rape and molest him when he was growing up. So, I mean, the guy never had a chance. Obviously doesn't excuse any of the stuff that he did, but that's the backdrop that you get for a lot of these books. And again, like I talked about earlier, it seems to be very prevalent in Washington state. You know, Washington is an interesting state in that regard. You know, I live in Washington myself, and it's an interesting place in that Western and Eastern Washington are very different, almost like two states. And a lot of this stuff does tend to occur outside the major Seattle metro areas, like this book in Spokane, which is in Eastern Washington. I don't know exactly why, like I talked about earlier, it just seems to be a lot of prevalence in the Washington area. So yeah, that's the book, By the River's Edge. I kind of talked about this earlier. It doesn't compare even close to If You Tell. It's not a bad book by any means. I think if you like true crime, you'll enjoy this. It's certainly an interesting, weird, strange story. But at the same time, it gets really hyper-focused on this sort of like sex change morality of it all. And for me, I don't know, I guess I just didn't really feel like it was that complicated. You still committed the crimes, regardless if you changed your sex or not. Again, like I mentioned, it's strange, but I don't know. It became a bit of a slog towards the end. Nothing compared to some of the other books that I've read of his, but this is his newest one. So appreciate it. Thanks for watching.